Fulton J. Sheen, God and the Intelligence, continuation of Chapter 8, Critical Appreciation of the Modern Objections Against Intelligence. The idea is never the direct object of the knowledge of the intellect, but only the indirect. It is only by another act, a reflex one, that the intellect attains the idea. The thing is always known before the idea of the thing, because the idea terminates in the essence of the thing known, and the thing known is in the sense order. It must not be imagined that the idea has no necessary or universal value. The idea by reflex abstraction is still universal, so far as the manner of knowledge the thing is concerned, namely, stripped of matter, which prevents its communicability, but not formally universal, as regard the nature represented. For the thing outside the mind is singular according to its mode of being, but in the universal according to its nature. If the intellect seizes the reality of the thing under its ratio, what is the difference between the ratio existing in the mind and the ratio existing in reality? What is the difference between the ratio of man existing in the mind and the ratio of man existing in Peter? Observe that the question is merely the difference of ratio, and not the difference between the universal and the particular. So far as the ratio of the thing is concerned, there is no difference whether it be apprehended by the mind or existent outside the mind. The ratio is the essence, and the essence is the same in both. Otherwise, there would be no identity and no true knowledge. But if the ratio is the same in both, is there no difference between them? The ratio has a different mode outside the mind from that which it has in the mind. Outside the mind, its mode of existence is material and individual. In the mind, it is without these material and individuating notes. It exists intentionally in the soul, and its term is this same object effectively known. St. Thomas says, "The nature of the thing which is known is truly outside the mind, but it has not the same mode of being outside the mind as it has when it is known. The ideas are not more excellent than the things, so far as their manner of representation is concerned, but they are more noble as regards the mode of their being." In the material universe, there is nothing exactly parallel to intentional being. Knowledge is an assimilation, but assimilation proceeds according to the nature of the one assimilating. In the psychological process of assimilation, it is not necessary that the plant life continue the same mode of existence in the animal tissue as it did in its external environment. It is merely sufficient that the chemical constituents remain the same. The essence of material things are in the human intellect, as a thing known in the one knowing, and not according to their real mode of being, as the intellect does not apprehend things according to their mode of being, that is, according to their materiality, according to its mode of being. The ultimate reason of intentional being in the intellect is to supply the deficiencies of the natural being. Thus they are enabled to acquire a mode of perfection which is not theirs by nature. It is thanks to this gift that man can sum up all creation within himself and give glory to God in the name of all visible creation. The intellect then, according to its entitative being, that is, the being of its own nature, in virtue of which it possesses immanent activity, is terminated by the idea, but according to its intentional being, terminates in the thing known. Knowledge requires a double union. Firstly, a union in intentative being, by which the subject is put in contact with the thing. Then the union by which one becomes the other, which accomplishes itself in intuitional being. Thus it is necessary that our intellect be determined by an accident which affects it in its intentative being, in order that it receives in itself the intentional being, and that the act of knowing be produced. The idea, therefore, is both subjective and objective, but under different relations. It is subjective as regards to its intentative being, but objective as regards to the intentional being. Subjective as regards its being, and objective as regards its value. Another illusion regarding the intellect, which needs to be dissipated, is that of the relation of the idea and the image. In his Oxford lecture on Perception of Change, M. Bergson committed himself to the same confusion which reigns among his contemporaries, declaring the idea to be nothing more than a sublised or emaciated or impoverished sensation. It is owing to this confusion that a pure empiricist philosophy has taken such deep root in our day, just as it was owing to its same confusion in the past that a similar philosophy was formed. The angelic doctor, passing the history of Greek philosophy in review, has this to say, which is so apt for the moment. Certain ancient philosophers, ignoring the power of the intellect and not distinguishing between sense and intellect, thought there was nothing in the world except that which could be apprehended either by the senses or by the imagination, and because only bodies fall under the sensible faculties, they thought only bodies existed, as the philosopher says in his Fourth Physics. The difference between the two is clear-cut and well-defined. First, the image becomes more perfect as it possesses more details. The idea, on the contrary, becomes more perfect as it gets away from details. My image of the table is more perfect as it contains the details of its size, weight, color, its surroundings, the books, the papers, which are upon it, and so forth. My idea of a table, on the contrary, is more perfect as it loses these details and becomes so dispossessed of them that it can apply the notion to every table in the universe. The image tends in the direction of the material determination, the idea in the direction of the material indetermination. One goes in one direction and the other in the other. It is quite impossible, therefore, that one should ever dissolve into the other, for by their very nature they are different. Among other important differences, St. Thomas points out this: a sense may be damaged by a sensible object, which is too powerful for the senses. A terrific explosion renders a man deaf. An intensely bright light renders them blind. The intellect, on the contrary, is never corrupted nor damaged by the excellence of its object. The idea of virtue, of justice, of force, of faith, hope, or charity has never been so strong for our intelligence as to cripple it. The idea of God, even, is not too strong for it. And what is more, and this is further difference, not only do the intelligible ideas fail to corrupt our intellectual powers, but they even render them more capable of seeing other intelligible objects. He who knows greater things is better able to know the lesser things. Thanks to the knowledge of a principle of mathematics, for example, the mathematician will see a multitude of conclusions which the untrained mathematician would fail to see after many elaborate and multiplied examples. The principle of an act and potency which Aristotle and the angelic doctor understood so well, instead of blinding their intellect by its force, enabled them more clearly to see the necessity of an actus purus God. A more fundamental difference, that, indeed, which underlies all others, is that the ratio contains the ratio intis of that which it represents, while the common image contains only the juxtaposed notes which make a thing known. but which never render the notes intelligible. Psychology, for example, characterizes man as reasonable, free, religious, sociable, and the like. That which makes man man is not his sociability, his liberty, and so forth, but rather his rationality. All the other notes flow from this one, and are intelligible only in virtue of it. Without the idea, there is only mechanical juxtaposition of qualities. This is one of the defects of the modern anti-intellectualism. It rejects the intellect because it cuts up reality into morsels, and at the same time falls into the very error by denying a difference in kind between concepts and images. A modern philosopher who has understood this necessary distinction is Dr. W. Tudor Jones. No other conclusion is possible, he writes, but that the human mind has been so formed as to discover, conserve, and further realities which are conceptual in their nature, and which indeed belong to another kind of sphere or dimension than the whole physical realm. We are living in two kinds of worlds. We have all the time to start with the sensuous world, and have also to pass to the conceptual world, for it is in this conceptual world that the physical world finds its meaning, value, and significance. The first world, without the second, merely means the knowing of the letters of a language without being able to put them together into words and propositions. The second kind of world, without the first, means attempting to carry water in a bucket without a bottom in it. Dr. Carr, as well, has seen the possibility of dissolving concepts into images, or even subtilizing images into concepts. Concepts are universals as distinct from particulars. Every attempt of the mind to discover the reality implied in our experience supposes the use of concepts, and these concepts are totally different in kind from percepts. The second general criticism against conceptual knowledge was that it solidified movement. The concepts enabled us to grasp hold of certain positions of the changeful streams of reality. By taking photographs of reality and substituting movement by some particular equivalent, but they do not grasp movement. The intellect, it is said, cannot seize movement. If not, how did an intellectualist such as Aristotle or Thomas know movement? How did they describe movement? Not only in its sensible manifestations, not only in the enumeration of its kinds, but in the determination of the very reason of movement, in the doctrine of the act and potency. If the intellect cannot know movement, how did the angelic doctor succeed in dividing the principal part of his Summa into the double movement of creatures, their procession from God and their procession back to God? Certainly a philosopher of intellect, which has explained the goodness of all natural things by their tendency of movement to their ultimate end, is no stranger to movement. Of course, this much must be conceded to the latter critics. If the modern philosopher means that the eternal devenir, which is the ground of all things, cannot be seized by the intelligence, he is perfectly within the bounds of common sense, or nothing is more unintelligible than an eternal becoming without a thing that becomes. If, however, we mean movement as manifested about us in the real world of sense reality, and in particular local motion, it is very true that the intelligence cannot seize it as the senses do. The sense see it in all its particular determinations, whereas the intellect does not. And from this it does not follow that the intelligence solidifies movement in seizing it, or that it takes a photograph of it. What the intelligence seizes is the ratio of the movement. And this is more profoundly movement in its very essence and nature than any knowledge by sense of sympathetic intuition. To seize the ratio of movement is not to solidify movement. Rather, it is to grasp it in all its fullness. The relation of act and potency, which is grasped by the intelligence, is so profoundly movement itself that it can be applied to every movement in the universe, from a gift of grace to the dropping of a leaf. If the intelligence grasped only a photograph of reality, it could not apply that photograph to all reality, any more than the photograph of the individual suffices for every man in the universe. What has been said above bears repetition. The fact that the intelligence seizes, grasps movement as movement is the greatest refutation of its imagined impossibility of doing so. Another similar criticism at the intellect through its conceptual knowledge breaks up the continuity in nature. The intelligence can represent only the discontinuous, while life itself is continuous, hence its unfitness for life. The assumption at the base of this objection is that all reality is monistic and continuous, and that every division of matter into independent bodies with absolutely determined limits is an artificial division. There is pluralism in the universe as well as continuity. The intellect does not put pluralism there, but it finds it there. The continuity which is in the universe, no other power than the intellect can perceive. It seizes the continuity of all orders from the mineral up to the highest choir of angels by seizing the reason of the continuity, namely the differentiations of essence in the unity of being. There is no continuity intelligible but the continuity of being, and being is the object of the intellect, and the intellect alone. Furthermore, does not the abiding consciousness which the mind has of itself and of its own continuity refute by fact any theoretical denial of the capacity of the intellect to grasp the continuous? The whole Bergsonian criticism is based on the false assumption that the intellectual elements are eternal and foreign to the real. Without doubt, the snapshots an exterior to the object photographed. But what does this metaphor mean? Does it mean that our ideas, the intellectual determinations by which we know the elements of a thing, are exterior to the thing analyzed, or that they are of another order entirely? That the idea is of another order than the thing known is cheerfully granted? But it is not that which the Bergsonian metaphor seeks to prove. It is rather to make us believe that in themselves the elements of analysis are of an entirely different order from the things analyzed, and are exterior to it. Here the metaphor of a snapshot loses its value, for it is no longer a question of photography, but of the thing photographed. Is the Parthenon exterior to Athens and the part of Athens, or only a fragmentary symbol, because a photograph image of the Parthenon, which we see in Paris, for example, is exterior to Athens? Descending into the order of nature and accidents, the intellect cannot even here be said to break up the continuity of an object. For those things which are in the sensible order, the intellect abstracts, not by knowing them as separated from all materiality, but separately. And it is not necessary that those things which are distinguished according to the intellect be distinct among things, because the intellect does not apprehend things according to their mode of being, but according to its mode. This last point touches the vital spot of an anti-intellectualism, and its substitute, intuition. When modern philosophy speaks of knowing movement as it is in its material reality, and continuity as it is in its material reality, it returns to the ancient philosophy of Empedocles, who insisted that like is known by like, fire is known by fire, water by water, air by air, and earth by earth, which was the old doctrine. The new is that becoming is known by becoming, and continuity by continuity. The ground of all things is becoming. The idea, which is the bond between matter and spirit, is suppressed. The result is a juxtaposition, but not knowledge. It was just to avoid this fusion of one angel with another that St. Thomas saw the necessity of positing ideas in angels. If one angel knew another angel without a likeness, there would be absorption, and knowledge never depends upon absorption. Apart from this fact, the intuition, in the modern sense, does away with the idea. It also inverts the order between the knower and the thing known. Instead of knowing the rose by a cognitive assimilation in the mind of the knower, modern sympathetic intuition assimilates the mind to the rose and becomes one with it and lives sympathetically with it. By such perversion of extremity, ill-becoming for a philosophy which defies evolution and continuity in the universe, plants assimilate minerals, but not vice versa. Why should there be a perversion in the cognitive order? Why should we be one with the rose instead of the rose one with us? In the psychological order, it means that we never eat our dinner, but we are eaten by it. The intelligence, being a spiritual faculty, has no designs against the material universe other than to reveal its intimate nature. It is not destined merely for the practical, as is strongly assumed by the anti-intellectualists, but also and principally for the spiritual. Abstraction and conceptual knowledge in the general are in no way due to the necessity of handling the practical, but rather due to the inability of our mind to handle the spiritual as it is in its material expression. The intellect is not a push from matter, for the greater can never come from the less. It is a gift from the Spirit, and that Spirit is God. The objection involves a vicious circle. The intellect is said to have been formed in the course of evolution by the necessity of handling the practical. But how could man conceive of handling the practical unless he had an intellect? The necessity of practical is thus made the origin of the intellect, and the intellect in its turn the origin of the practical. The true notion of the intellect and its relation to the practical has been stated by St. Thomas in these words: "What is accidental to the nature of the object of a power does not differentiate that power, for it is accidental to a thing colored to be man, to be great or small. Hence all such things are apprehended by the same power of sight. Now to a thing apprehended by the intellect, it is accidental, whether it be directed to operation or not. Such a conception of the intellect is at pole's end from the conception that intellect began with tool-making, justifies our contention that modern anti-intellectualism is not a criticism of a faculty, but a state of mind of the last century. Another error at the base of modern thought, in which we have already made reference, is that of confusion of reason and intelligence. Reason is not identical with the intelligence in all respects. A well-defined distinction between the two is the basis of the scholastic system. The confusion of the two, and at certain times their identification, is the source of the modern error of anti-intellectualism. Scientism of the 19th century defied reason. The thinkers of the 20th century identified that abuse of reason with the intelligence. In other words, they called reason the intelligence. The criticism of scientism which they made was not one of an abuse of reason, which it should have been, but a complete and total rejection of the intelligence. And with the passing of the quantitative, rationalistic, and mechanical formulae of exaggerated scientists, intelligence passed away. In the search for a new way of knowing, particularly a new way of knowing so far as the things of religion are concerned, a distinction must be made between ideal and fact. The ideal, which modern philosophy adopts in rejecting scientific intellectualism, is that of directness and immediacy in knowledge. And to this ideal, the intelligence, in the scholastic sense of the term, corresponds. But scholasticism is either not known or is ignored. Hence, the defective substitutes for the intelligence of the scholastics. In fact, the new knowledge by sympathetic intuition and its other forms does not attain the ideal of the intelligence, but really sinks back into the lower form, a knowledge by sense experience. It is at this point that the modern philosophy is reposing at this moment. If there had been one leader of modern thought during this period who was clear-visioned enough to see the distinction between the abuse of a thing and its legitimate use, and between the reason and the intelligence, we might today be enjoying the fruits of a philosophy whose basis would be the intellectual intuition of the angelic doctor instead of sentimental and affective knowledge, which can give us nothing better than an evolving God. Modern philosophy has severely condemned reason, or analysis, as it is sometimes called in modern terminology. It is rejected because it is imperfect, being a mere mechanical instrument without any real value for life in its continuity and in its evolution. In declaring the imperfection of reason, modern philosophy has emphasized a truth of common sense philosophy. Throughout the philosophy of the angelic doctor, there is nothing more clearly manifest than his insistence on the imperfection of reason. The answer to the question, why do we abstract? Why do we make judgment by composition and division? Is the same as the answer to the question, why do we reason? We reason, St. Thomas answers, because of the weakness of the intellectual light in us. If our knowledge were by infused ideas and not from the sensible universe, we should have no need of the abstraction. If we saw everything that is reliable in an idea as an angel does, we should have no idea of sense knowledge. We should merely see intellectually as we see corporally. Furthermore, if our intelligence could see in an idea all the possible predicates of that idea, as does an angel or God, we should have no need of judgment by prediction. In like manner, if our intelligence were sufficiently strong to see all the possible conclusions in a principle, we should have no need of reason, as at present we have no need of reason to see the truth of principles which are immediately evident. Reason then is a necessary result of our present condition. As we are not born men, but children, so, intellectually, we are not born with all the conclusions contained in a given principle, but must grow up in them gradually by a certain movement. As in judgments, there is a comparison of subjects and predicate. So in reason, there must be a comparison of conclusion and principle. Such a process implies a movement, and such precisely is the nature of a reason. The modern objection against the perfection is really a Thomistic truism. Reason is the imperfection of the intelligence. Certitudo rationis est ex defectu intellectus. But because reason is an imperfection, it does not follow that we can dispense with it. It is an imperfection which attaches itself to our nature. It is a necessary imperfection. Necessitas rationis ex defectu intellectus. It is the penalty of being a man and of having an intelligence whose light is unequal to that of intelligence of the angels. In denying its necessity, modern philosophy has been false to one of its basic principles, the principle of evolution or movement. Reason is rejected because, as we are told, it is unsuited for life in its continuity and progress. This is the very reason the angelic doctor gives for its necessity. Under the penalty of having no progress and continuity in nature, we must have reason. Evolution demands continuity. There must be rapprochement between the various orders, and what is the highest yet evolved must in some way possess continuity with the order from which it has been evolved, as Professor Alexander has shown in his Space, Time, and Deity. But if there is no reason, there is no continuity between the mere materials of sense, knowledge, and conclusions which are contained potentially in them. Once the reason is introduced, as the continuity is established not only with the order below man, but also with the order above him. Instead, then, of being unsuited for life in its continuity, reason is the very condition of of our vision of this continuity. Without it, there is a hiatus which renders intelligible any evolutionary conception of the universe. Furthermore, reason is movement. Why should a philosophy of movement reject it? Thus, at one time it defies movement, and at another rejects reason because it cannot grasp movement. A philosophy of movement is, like a child, extremely difficult to satisfy. Reason is a movement. It is a progress from a principle to a conclusion. Being movement, it must have a point of departure and a point of arrival. Without a point of departure and without a point of arrival, there is no movement. At both extremes, there is something which is not movement. From these extremes, the reasoning process draws its validity and its value. Certitudo rationis est ex intellectu. At the extreme stands an intellectual intuition, an immediate and direct perception of a truth. At one extreme is the intellectual seizure of a principle, which is known immediately as the eye sees and immediately knows color. At the other extreme is the apprehension of a conclusion. Aristotle has told us that reason is dependent on two anterior operations of the mind, abstraction and judgment, which depend one upon the other. Here we must revert to what has been said of ideas, namely that they attain reality. They have a real value because they attain reality in its very essence without distorting it in any way, merely giving to the physical existence and the intentional or mental existence. The judgment which is made up of these ideas attains reality in like manner. The same must now be said of the reasoning process. If it is made up of judgments, which are judgments of reality and not mere mental creations of a blind workman at his loom, then its conclusions are of real value. If the scientist reasons about quantity, his conclusions apply to quantity as it is. If the biologist reasons about life in its biological manifestations, its conclusions possess a real value for that life. If the metaphysician reasons about the world, his conclusions apply to a real world and are not merely subjective ideas. If the metaphysician reasons about God, religion means something more for him than a relation between our upper and our lower self. It means a relation with a real being upon whom we are absolutely dependent. That article of the Summa, which treats of the value of the idea, is of first importance in philosophy, and rightly deserves to be called the cornerstone of philosophical reconstruction. Professor Taylor has seen its importance, as he has so testified during the Thomistic sexcentenary celebration. He writes, "This is at least is clear that the theory of perception and perceptual knowledge, which is to meet the requirements of modern science, will have to be something in its general characteristics very much like that of St. Thomas. It will have to combine, as he, at any rate, meant to combine, the two contemporary positions that our knowledge of the world around our bodies is mediated, in fact, by highly complicated processes of a special kind, and that as knowledge it is direct, unmediated apprehension, not of ideas or images, but of actual physical reality. No one, so far as I know, among great modern philosophers has ever seen so clearly as St. Thomas that the problem is precisely not to sacrifice one of the true positions to the other." In conclusion, it is worth noting that very serious consequences follow from the modern anti-intellectualist doctrines. The modern position denies a speculative value to the intelligence. It also denies that God is the Alpha and the principle of all things. But from this double denial there flows a double conscience. First, if the intelligence is destined merely for matter and for practical, is the organic and not spiritual, why are things intelligible? Why can things be known? Why are things known? Modern philosophy cannot answer this question. Secondly, if God is not the principle of things, but merely the outcome of the world's evolution, then what ultimate explanation is there of intelligibility in things? 1. What is the proximate reason of intelligibility? Why can things be known? It is not because their nature is separable from matter. Anything whatever is knowable inasmuch as it is separable from matter. The animal never knows a thing in its ratio, because it never knows in it apart from this individual. So true it is that intelligibility varies with separability from matter, that the moment you reach a point where there is things without matter, the intellect and that which is known are one and the same. What then is the conclusion? It forms de se are communicable, that is, separable from matter, and separability from the matter constitutes intelligibility. Then material things are intelligible in potency. They are not intelligible in act, because de facto forms are individualized in matter. It is not because the form of the nature of man is individualized in this particular man that it is unintelligible. It is because it is associated with matter. Natural, knowable things antedate our knowledge and constitute its measure. If the intelligibility in potency were not already in our sense knowledge, it would not be possible for us ever to know the thing. We do not put intelligibility into things except artificially. We discover it. The condition of intelligibility is separability from matter. Things can be known because the form of things is capable of existing apart from such and such individual matter. What is the condition of intelligence? If separability constitutes the power to be known, what constitutes the power to know? It is separation from matter. The condition of the act of intellectual knowledge is separation from matter, as the condition of knowability is the separability from matter. Matter is the reason of impenetrability. Knowledge demands impenetration, an assimilation of the other. To receive the other while remaining oneself as possible only to a spiritual faculty which is not determined to the hic est nunc. Knowledge implies, therefore, the reception of the form without the matter. But can a form exist without matter? Is there anything intrinsically impossible about such a condition? The answer of the angelic doctor is to be found in a work of his youth, De ante et essentiae. It is impossible, he writes, that there should be any matter without form, but it is not impossible that there should be form without matter. Form, as form, does not depend on matter. If one thing is the cause of another thing, the cause can exist without the thing caused, but not vice versa. The form is the cause formal of the composite. Forma dat esse materiae. It can therefore exist apart from matter. In order, therefore, that knowability is reduced to knowledge, the matter of the individual thing given through sense knowledge must be revealed without its individual notes, which constitute the very reason of its knowability. The intelligible in potency can become the intelligible in act only by deundation of its matter. It is not yet intellectual nourishment any more than the plant is ready-made nourishment for the animal. The nutritive elements of the plant are only in potency for the animal. In order that the animal may utilize them, its nutritive faculty must be active. In like manner, in order that we may grasp the intelligible in potency, we must have an intelligence in act. What the enzymes of the stomach juices are in the digestive order, the power of the active intellect is in the intellectual order. The necessity of positing an active intellect is due to the fact that the nature of material things which are known does not exist outside the soul in materiality and intelligibly in act, but is there intelligible in potency only. Hence it is fitting that there should be some power which makes these natures intelligible in act. This power in us, called the active intellect, by this power of extraction, the principle ascendi becomes the principium cognoscendi, and these are identical so far as the thing known is concerned, for a thing is knowable by the principle. 2. The ultimate explanation of intelligibility, the answer to the question, why are things intelligible in potency? St. Thomas gives the solution. In all things not generated by mere chance, the form of a thing is always the end of the generation. The plant generates a plant, not a horse. The animal generates an animal, like unto itself, not a vegetable. But the form cannot be the end of the process of generation unless the likeness of the form is in some way in the generator. Now, in nature, there are two kinds of generation. In the broad sense of the term, there is first the generation which operates in virtue of a blind necessity of nature, or by instinct, and there is another which operates in virtue of the intelligence. An example of the first is all biological generation in the lower order. An example of the second is the form of a house, which exists in the mind of an architect before the house is built. In the first, there is an assimilation of the effect to the form. In the second, the form which is conceived in the mind is produced in the real order. The architect seeks to make the house like the form which is in his mind. Since the world was made, not by chance, but by God, who is intelligence itself, as we shall prove, it is necessary that there should be in the divine mind a form according to which the world is made, and this is the reason of the idea. Et in hoc consistit ratio ideae. This idea, which exists in the mind of God, and to which all things are likened, is nothing else than the essence of God. God knows his essence perfectly. He knows it in every way in which it is knowable, and in all its perfections. He knows his essence not only as it is in itself, and in its necessity and eternity, but also in its participability. That is, all the possible ways in which created beings may participate in his being. The stone by existence, the plant by life, the animal by consciousness, man and angel by intelligence. All of these possible participations he possesses within himself from all eternity, as the artist in a feeble way possesses within himself the form of the statue which he intends to chisel. No creature, therefore, possesses being or any other perfection except in as far as it is an imitation or a copy or a participation in the being and the attributes of God, just as no statue exists in the world which does not imitate in some way the design and the formal idea of the artist who conceived it. Although these exemplar ideas which exist in the mind of God, and according to which the whole universe has been made, are multiple in relation to the things themselves, they are really not distinct from the divine essence, inasmuch as the divine essence, because of its infinity, may be imitated in innumerable ways. The meaning of idea is form in the Greek. Ideas are therefore from the forms of things existing outside the things themselves. Now, the form existing outside the thing itself may be considered in one of two ways: an exemplar, that is, as the principle of the making of the thing, or as type, that is, a principle of its cognition, inasmuch as the forms are said to be knowable in the one knowing. As exemplars, they pertain to the practical intellect, and as type or ratio, they belong to the speculative intellect as well as the practical. The second person of the Blessed Trinity, in the language of theology, is the exemplar, the type or ratio of all things. He is therefore the source of all art and all science. And what is art but a participation of the exemplary cause? And what is science but the participation in the formal cause? It is here that the transcendentals, beauty, truth, find their perfection. It is here, too, that all art and all science must look if they would know their source. Since the world has been made by God, who is intelligence itself, the exemplary and formal cause of creation, the world is intelligible. That is, it has been made intelligibly. We do not put intelligibility into the universe. We discover it, as the statue is the imitation of the idea in the mind of the artist. So each creature is an image of an idea existing in the divine mind. Boethius therefore correctly says that all forms which are in matter can be called images, inasmuch as they come from those forms which are without matter. Everything from the stone to an angel is the realization of an idea. Eternal ideas realized in the angels make of each one a distinct species, because there is no matter to individualize them. Eternal ideas realized in the mineral, plant, animal, and man make of each an individual, owing to the matter which is associated with the nature of each, and which is the principle of their multiplication. It cannot therefore be argued that everything which is intelligible must be in matter, for it is only accidental to the object to be separated from the knower in the ontological order. This follows that the principle that knowledge ultimately comes from above, not from below. there can never be an object which an idea has not preceded, but there can be ideas which have not been materialized. The idea outside of God and outside of us is thing. The thing in God and in us is idea. This is also the ultimate reason why God and not man is the measure of things. Natural things are midway between the knowledge of God and our knowledge, for we receive knowledge from nature, from natural things, of which God is the cause by his knowledge. Hence, as the natural object of knowledge are prior to our knowledge, and are its measure, so knowledge of God is prior to natural things, and is their measure, as, for instance, a house is midway between the knowledge of the builder who made it and the knowledge of the one who derives it from the house already built. We receive our knowledge from natural things, of which things God by his knowledge is cause. In each thing, therefore, there is the ratio, the principle of its intelligibility. But this principle of intelligibility is there only in potency, coming from the mind of God into matter. It has lost its character of universality, necessity, and transcendence, which makes it the direct and immediate object of the intelligence. It has fallen into existent number, movement, and contingency, in order that it may revive in the mind with its proper characteristics. It is necessary that the reality coming into our mind by sense perception in some way make a return to its source, disincarnate itself from matter, and go on the opposite way from which the individuation by matter imposed on it. The individuation realized by the generation of being is as an attraction of the idea in matter. In order to know, there must be a contrary action, an extraction or abstraction. Such is the profound and ultimate reason of abstraction, namely to render ideas intelligible in act, as they are in the mind of God. It is the divine plan of bringing all things back to God, who is the source, the Alpha and the Omega of all things. Divine wisdom is the reason of all things. In conclusion, then, it may be truly said that the intelligence, instead of being a barrier to philosophical progress, is really the only royal road to wisdom. It alone reveals the wonderful coordination of matter and spirit, the descent of all things from God by creation, and their ascent from the intellectual knowledge of man. Only a philosophy which upholds a spiritual faculty can explain even the possibility of knowledge, as only such a philosophy can account for real progress in perfection among created beings. The philosophy of St. Thomas gives an answer to the intelligibility of the universe, both on the part of the object and on the part of the subject. On the part of the object, because form are des es communicable; on the part of the subject, because the intellect is spiritual. For those who would go still deeper into the reason of the intelligibility, it gives the more ultimate answer that things are intelligible on the part of the object, because they have been made intelligible by God, and they are intelligible on the part of the subject, thanks to the light of the active intellect given by God, which reveals the ideas according to which all things are made. But according to the modern notion, separation from matter is possible, either because the intellect is represented as organic, or because ideas are merely the composition of material images, possessing no faculty for transcending matter. Man is therefore incapable of ever arriving at the intelligibility in things. Furthermore, since it denies God as the principal and final cause of the universe, it cannot say that things have been made intelligibly. If the world has not been made according to the idea of the perfect intelligence, There is no ultimate reason why we should find, in the last analysis, a rational universe. Denial of the intelligence means denial of the intelligibility. Is it any wonder that Dr. Schiller, who denies a value to the intelligence, should see nothing more in the metaphysics than an idiosyncrasy, or that Mr. Bailey should say that not reasonableness, but dramatic completeness is the chief unifying power in man's life?